Catherine and Simone for having Ilhan as part of this amazing evening. I mean, I've been so moved by the poetry, they've been fantastically read, and yeah, these people are real, true, strong resistors, those who resist, and I'm very proud, and Ilhan is very pleased to be here too, in spirit. So Ilhan Sami Çomak is Kurdish. Well, he's Turkey's longest serving student prisoner. At the moment in Turkey there are between 50 and 70,000 students in prison. Most of them were arrested since 2016, when there are periodic swoops on the Kurdish population, but since 2016 and that attempted coup, there's been hundreds of thousands of imprisonment. Ilhan was a Kurdish student. He was studying geography in Istanbul in 1992-94, and in 1994 he was arrested and taken straight to a torture centre. Arrested for being Kurdish, and they accused him of having lit forest fires above Istanbul in the name of the PKK. There are not really many forests above Istanbul, and Ilhan had not done that. And after they then took him to the torture centre for 19 days of severe torture, he signed a false confession to say he'd lit those fires. He then said that two of the guards took him up above Istanbul and took his photograph between them with a petrol can, which is nonsense, because they wouldn't have been there at the time anyway. So there'd been a military coup in 1993, and so there was a military court, which later the European court said was illegal and was not impartial. So Ilhan spent 22 years in pre-trial detention. He firstly got a death sentence for separatism, for supposed terrorism and being part of the PKK. That was commuted to life, which is 36 years in Turkey, and by August this year he will have served 30 years in prison. Ilhan has spent the last 9 years in solitary confinement, wanting to get ready to come back out into the world. He's spent time in dorms, and he's now just, against his will, been put back into a dorm. We had an event for him on Friday. So I'm Caroline Stockford and I work for PEN Norway. I studied Turkish at SOAS many years ago, and I'm really glad to be able to use my languages in the last 10 years to do human rights work. So I design and run projects for PEN Norway, on freedom of expression in Turkey, Kurdish linguistic rights, right to a fair trial. I've monitored about 200 trials of journalists, and I've been to Silivri, where Ilhan is held, to the court, and there's 23,000 people in prison there. And there's a remarkable thing about him, and I'm going to read very briefly from a letter that he wrote on his birthday, and then he sent you all a special message on Saturday by phone to his friend Ipek in Turkey. When she first met him, Ipek is a law lecturer, and she visits him every week, because she's currently recovering from a cancer operation, so she can't visit him at the moment. But she's visited him every week for the last 14 years. First time she met him, and he'd been in prison for 15 or 16 years by then. First thing he said was, "I'm taller than you expected, aren't I? And I'm a lot more handsome." He said, "Why don't you put your feet up against the glass and we'll talk on the phone? We can pretend we're on the garden wall of my house when I was a child." He is still playful. He still has a sense of humour. And it's hard for us to understand what daily life is like for these people. It is horrific, of course. One thing Ilhan said once in a letter really struck home. It was 4 years ago in March, this time of year, and he said, the guards opened my cell door 1 hour early this morning. He said they opened it at 7 o'clock instead of 8 o'clock. He said, I ran into the little yard and I saw the sunrise for the first time in 27 years. And so these are he's still hopeful. He knows that Istanbul and the world has changed since then. And he's due to be released on the 21st of August this year. So it's really hard to know quite what to do. I mean, we've always, which is the great thing about PEN and Exiled Writers Inc. and everything, having the umbrella of literature, sticking to the poetry. He doesn't write poetry about revolution or about a free Kurdistan or anything like that. He's left that behind him a long time ago. He writes about nature. He's brought the whole of his childhood in the mountains. I've been to his village, which is now deserted and bombed, but it's incredible. There are nomads. It's just the life with goats and sheep and horses. So the poems will be read, but I will read for you the parts of his letter that he wrote a week or so ago, and then the address to you. Dear friends, I will soon leave behind me 30 years of imprisonment, and it won't be long until I get out. This will be the last birthday I'll experience in prison. Freedom really is very close now, so close that I've begun to be able to almost smell it as if it were right next to me. I have thought so long and hard about freedom and all its implications. I've wanted it so much that the concept of it has spilled over from merely the knowledge and experience of it and has gained new dimensions. It now occupies almost all of my imagination and has begun to manifest itself as an entity all of its own that exists in and of itself and can speak its own name. I believe that it takes its strength from my artistic labour, from my craft, and from the deep passion that I feel for life and for freedom, and the way in which I express that. I ask myself, what kind of an Ilhan Sami Çomak would I be if this imprisonment that shook my life to its foundations and took over its direction had not happened? Now that freedom is so close, this question ransacks my mind, and I have a clear and concise answer to it. If I had not been imprisoned, I would not be this Ilhan Sami that you know today. The chances of me being able to meet you, to appear like this to you, thanks to the writerly character I developed through poetry and literature, would have been zero. Instead, I would have been a guy just running around here and there in pursuit of his life, getting frustrated by the hardship of making ends meet. I would have been an old chap with a belly and lots of children, allowing my thinking to be led and my decisions to be made for me by managers and executives. You know, I would have been just an ordinary person in the great majority of the populace. Or I might have been one of over 17,000 unsolved murders or missing persons that we Kurds have experienced, and my name may have been forgotten and inscribed upon a void. Choosing being ordinary and anonymous, or choosing death rather than imprisonment, demonstrates just how very difficult life and the possibilities of fate are, and resembles then a vicious circle with no end. Dear friends, in Joseph Conrad's book, The Shadow Line, he says, "All roads are long which lead to one's heart's desire." Sadly, it is so. I was unable to change the reality of my fate as a prisoner and to lead my life according to my own wishes, and yet still I held tightly to the concept and awareness of being free. The 30 years that were stolen from me are indeed a great loss, yes. It's a suffering that can never be reversed. And yet whenever I look back, I give myself a pass in this exam, in fact an A grade with no room for error. Imprisonment was my lot, but at the end of the day, the poetry, poetic consciousness, the place and time that poetry creates, all these things made me me. I have to openly acknowledge that despite the enormity of the loss, I still do not put on sackcloth and ashes. For now I have poetry. Now I have a poet's name and identity, and it's this version of myself that I value over all other aspects. The identity of a poet who has gained countless poet and artist friends all over the world who have made me feel their love. I know quite well what I have gained. I am now in a place that I could never have reached had I been in the outside world. Now the main problem I have will be to carry on with this precious and beautiful art in the outside world, and to make it proliferate in the times of freedom that lie ahead. It might be that I will need your solidarity then also. I believe that if I call out to you then, you will answer. As a poet making his way to the life that he lost, holding tight to poetry in spite of oppression and the passing of time, I hold also very tightly to the notion that you, my friends, are with me, by my side, as I mark this last birthday of mine in detention and look towards the future and to freedom. I will celebrate my next birthday with you, feeling like I am the most free man in all the world. How lucky I am. I thank you all. Ilhan Sami Çomak. And then very briefly, I'll read the message for you. And one moment. And also just to say a very quick word about what PEN Norway, what we did to campaign for Ilhan. I was just saying, literature, the safety of the umbrella almost of literature is very important, and I still think people are afraid of poetry, which is wonderful. You should be terrified of poetry. Poetry is difficult, it's dangerous, It is revolutionary, and it gets through. You know, we were sending. So very quickly, I was writing poetry with Ilhan in prison. We'd do 8 lines each. I would begin, and he would finish, and then we'd swap around. And then I thought, well, I'm not a really high-profile, well-published poet, so I opened it out to poets around the world. And now we have 80 poets who've written for Ilhan, and in America, lots of poet laureates. Anne Waldman, the Beat poet, George Surtees, Ruth Cadell, and Alice Oswald. So some fabulous British poets, Irish, American, Welsh, and New Zealand even. And he replied to each poem with another poem. So there'll be a wonderful anthology coming out very soon, I hope, for such a great man. And his brother just said on Friday, I said, how can Ilhan still be cheerful? And he said, well, he is Ilhan, that is Ilhan. He said, even 30 years in prison will not take that away from him. So he's a remarkable person, and this is his message for you. And thank you to the students in advance for your readings. Until today, poetry has always been my home, my haven. I have always taken refuge in it from the cruelty of prison. Now, in a very short time, I will be a free man, and this time I will move my poetry haven to the world so that I can take shelter in it whenever necessary. I've always been very grateful to Amnesty International for being the voice of oppressed people around the world. Knowing the value of this very well as a poet who spent decades of his life in oppression, I would like to say that all their efforts are highly appreciated. Now being the subject matter of their meeting gives me even extra strength. I'm excited that they heard my voice and the voice of my poetry. I am even stronger with the energy that I will find from this now, and I thank you all very much for this. Thank you very much.